Now we have Dr. Judy Wilyman.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Mandurah. Who would have thought that on a Sunday afternoon you'd be here talking about politics? But I can only say that I'm very glad that you are, because this is the most important election that you will participate in, and we only have a grassroots movement to do this. So I'm saying to you before we start, if you don't care enough to do something, every one of you, then nothing will change. There will be no future for our children. Right? The elephant in the room at this point in the election, 4 weeks before they announced this election, all the directives disappeared. All the segregation, the coercion, the loss of bodily autonomy, your fundamental human right. There is no freedom without your bodily autonomy. Your quality of life depends upon it. You take a drug and the side effects. Which major party is talking about your loss of bodily autonomy, or even your loss of informed consent to medications without coercion? Any major party? They've all gone back to talking about housing and debt and immigrants and all those things to take your mind off it. And you turn on the radio and there's some good vibe music coming through. No one's now being segregated and removed from restaurants or wearing masks, which was simply a symbol of COVID to make you fearful. 1 minute they're on, the next minute they're off, and what difference did you see in the community? Nothing. For 2 years you've been terrorised with false and misleading health information, and here we are in May 2022, and they have coerced 80 to 90% of the population to take an experimental gene technology, only provisionally approved. Experimental. Greg Hunt has told you that. And people took it for their travel, for their jobs, so they could participate in society with their friends. How evil is that by a government when all the medical directives for doctors state that all medications, including vaccination, must be given with fully informed consent without coercion, manipulation and pressure. So every doctor is currently breaching their medical ethics and human rights. Okay? So that's the elephant in the room. And why am I standing up here to take on the politics of this issue? Okay, as a science teacher, I went back to investigate this health issue. And this is a public health issue. It's not medical. It's always been a public health issue. Do you think that politicians have the right to medicate the population? No, they pulled the wool over your eyes. In the 1990s, they merged public health under the medical umbrella and told all the citizens around the world, you must only get your health information on vaccinations and disease control from medical doctors. So I've got a degree, the highest degree in this issue on the history of the control of infectious diseases, but we had a media that has denigrated and ridiculed this scientific information for over a decade now. It's a public health issue, and so of course the government has overstretched its powers. And they've been bribing us with money and false scientific information, false and misleading health information for over 3 decades now. So all of that is described in my book. And here we are living in Australia and round the world, by the way, and every family is suffering. We are divided. Apparently there's a new class of people called unvaccinated. Since 2021, we now depend upon drugs to prevent a disease that's not even an outbreak in our country because Scott Morrison closed the border. Did everyone forget that? Okay? And yet, the media controls this narrative because we do not have an independent media anymore. For 10 years. They have been removing the diversity of ownership of media. And Murdoch owns at least 80% of our media, and the rest, it's all corporate sponsored. So they're presenting these issues to you in corporate interests. Okay, this is what's happening. Okay, we lost democracy 10 years ago, and I woke up in 2010 after I'd completed a lot of the research for my book. So it's public health. It's not medical information that the government is allowed to provide. None of these health ministers have any medical qualifications, and they're medicating the population. Every time you put that mask on your face as a healthy person without symptoms, you're breathing in your own excretory products. It makes you sick. And now they've told you that your fellow human being is a risk to society without any symptoms. It's completely untrue, and the World Health Organization admitted it in June 2020. But guess who controls the narrative? The media and the medical industry complex, all the lobby groups and the health department. It is a collaboration. Okay? So I'm standing up here today for the Australian Federation Party. Now, all of you know that there's quite a few freedom fighter parties, but they're not all the same. Let me tell you, it's not going to be good enough just to put the majors last. Okay? If we want representative democracy, you've got to vote for a party that is going to put that in. And that's what AFP has pledged to do. If you go to our website, you'll see we're going to have regular town hall meetings once a month, which we've already started, so that you can come and speak with your local member and give them your feedback on issues. And that will be passed up to policy development. And there's a number of other pieces of action that we'll put in place to ensure representative democracy. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing, and I'm going to be brutally honest, because this is critical. If we lose this election, and I'm going to say I'm going to go further than Hoodie, it would be a nightmare for me to wake up with Scott Morrison or Albanese as our Prime Minister. It is Scott Morrison who has brought us to this tyranny and corruption. The Liberal Party has been in government for 9 years. When Abbott took over government, it is the Liberal Party that has brought us to this point. So please be aware of that, because of course the Murdoch media, the right-wing media, wants you to believe that it's the left. Okay? Now both of them will put in the same agenda, okay? The legislation is already there to roll out the digital identity and the digital financial system that will lead us completely into control and surveillance of the population, the social credit system. But you have already joined that. None of the people that took that new gene technology, that's not a vaccine, it was falsely promoted, took it for health, right? You all took it to travel, to keep your jobs, to participate in society. But I'm not judging you. My 3 adult children did that as well. What choice does one have? If the government and boss and your employer bribes you with a drug, or you lose your job, is that a choice or is that coercion? Coercion. Everything is unlawful. Sue your employer. Sue Scott Morrison. None of that is lawful because it's not medicine. They don't have the right. They've overstepped their powers and they're medicating the population. I go to my doctor and very, very rarely, but when one has to get a mask exemption, one has no choice. And when they start sprouting, well, the health department says, I say, I haven't come here to get health advice from a politician. I've come here to get advice from my doctor, my medical doctor, that's required to put the patient's best interest first. Okay? They can't do that anymore because of the regulatory board. So I've been through that many times. So there's lots of ways in which they've politicised this scientific issue, and I've described many of them in my book. Vaccination, Australia's loss of health freedom. I didn't have a crystal ball, and it came out in March 2020 when everyone was being locked up. It is false and misleading scientific information you're getting from the government, and it is public health. They're only entitled to design public health policies, not medical. All right, so the reason I've chosen the Australian Federation Party is because we are going to put the people's voice back in the Parliament. We are going to allow the people to control policy design and bring back our sovereignty. In 2005, our politicians signed up to the international health regulations, and we lost our sovereignty then. We are now governed not by the World Health Organization, but a body behind that called the Gavi Alliance. Bill and Melinda Gates and the Federation of Pharmaceutical Companies, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. That's how you tie a public health issue to the economy and the economic reset. And then they created this fraudulent pandemic. So if you join a party, a freedom party, did anyone see the Australian Federation Party in the media, the mainstream media? Has anyone seen the United Australia Party in the mainstream media? Has anyone seen One Nation in the mainstream media? Okay, now every candidate for all of these parties is genuine and passionate about fighting for freedom. But you need to look to see if that party will allow every member to have an independent vote to represent their constituents in the Parliament. The Liberals, Labor, Greens, Nationals, One Nation, and I believe UAP as well, on many issues require members to vote along party lines. They cannot represent the people because of that. And I know this personally because I spoke with Malcolm Roberts in 2019 because parents have been fighting this issue with the children's no jab, no pay and no jab, no play. And he said to me in 2019, I cannot question vaccination in the Parliament because I will lose my job, I will be sidelined. And yet before an election, we have several Liberals speaking up and the media is being prepared to put it out there, the truth about these coercive policies. But will One Nation be able to represent the people on every issue in the Parliament? That's what we need to ask One Nation. And same with UAP. And I'm also aware that some of these parties have financial contracts with their members so that when candidates are elected, the candidate will have to pay thousands of dollars if they decide to leave the party. Well, if they can't leave the party, and we need transparency on how much money they would have to pay back to the party, then they can't put in place representative democracy. Okay? So we need to choose parties that will put in place a people's voice, form a coalition. And what we've done so far, firstly, as I said, the Australian Federation Party is putting back sovereignty for Australia, the national interest and the people's voice. We stand for informed consent to all medications, our right to bodily autonomy. We stand for unity. I'm hoping the jabbed and the unjabbed are all here today because we've always lived with so-called vaccinated and unvaccinated people for decades. There should be no division in our society. So make sure you tell everyone that. And you have a very serious decision to make. We are now in a valueless society. Scott Morrison and the Liberal government have put in place immoral policies. It's corruption, to a peak of corruption with conflicts of interest in all of our boards. So they are unable to now design policy in the people's best interest. And you see, when you suppress the opposition, this was Novak Djokovic, a hero. And he did it even though Novak Djokovic had a valid medical exemption. This was a thought crime. Literally, they thought that because it would look like anti-vaccination, they just wouldn't let him into the country. So we have now the first athlete that's been deported for not taking a drug. So that's Scott Morrison's legacy, all right? And we were also hearing stupid things from Mark McGowan, other than the insults that he throws at all the parents and citizens, and I won't go through that because we've all heard it. But he gets on TV and he says, the virus will find the unvaccinated. Well, let me tell you, the virus has found all the so-called vaccinated, and it's the unvaccinated that are still healthy and not being hospitalised and dying. And I'm going to tell you this situation because it represents the experience that many, many people are having across the country. There was a terrible car accident yesterday, and there's 3 people in hospital, and one's got spinal injuries, one's got a huge gash on the leg, and the other one's got a broken leg. Because they refused the PCR test, the doctors told them to wait over there and wouldn't treat them for many hours, and I don't know if they've been treated yet. But all of you are well aware that so-called unvaccinated people, us healthy people, are not even allowed into the hospitals now. So we don't have a health department, we've got a sickness department. That's not medicine, and any doctor should be hanging their heads in shame. You know, I've been doing this for 10 years now, talking about the genetics of the population. You know, that's the doctor's fundamental principle of medicine. You cannot recommend a drug to any individual without providing advice specific to their own particular circumstances and genetics. That's the doctor's fundamental principle. Not even an ethic, it's a principle. And they're breaching it. They're not producing health anymore, and none of us want to go to the doctor because we don't trust them. Okay, this is the situation we're in. The education system's falling down as well. The indoctrination and programming of our kids on a number of issues, not just this false vaccination agenda that you're getting. Okay, pull your kids out for the moment, homeschool. Let's get a party in that can truly represent the people. So research. Do your research before you go to the polls and list out exactly who you're going to vote for before you get there. And please spread this information to everybody you can, because the Australian Federation Party does not get any media attention.